The desert sun hammered down like the fist of an angry god. And Silas Ward figured he'd seen enough of death to smell it from a mile off. But what he found half buried in the hardpan wasn't quite death. It was something that made his stomach turn harder than any corpse ever had. A woman's head protruded from the packed earth like some grotesque flower, her dark hair matted with blood and alkali dust. Fresh carving marked her forehead the word sinner, cut deep enough to weep crimson in the merciless heat. Her eyes, when they found his, held the kind of terror that came from knowing hell wasn't some distant place of judgment, but a hole in the ground where you got buried alive. "Water," she whispered, voice like wind through bleached bones. Silas dismounted his hands, already working at the deliberately tamped earth. They'd packed it tight with wet clay and gravel calculated to keep her breathing just long enough to suffer. A rope around her neck connected to a stake driven deep. If she'd tried to pull free, she would have strangled herself. "Easy now," he murmured, digging faster. "How long you been here?" "Since dawn. They're coming back at sunset to finish it." The sun hung low, painting the wasteland the color of dried blood. Maybe 2 hours of light left. Silas worked the rope free, then scooped earth from around her shoulders. She wore what had once been a white dress, now stained with dirt and darker things he didn't want to identify. "Who did this?" "The righteous folk of Redemption Creek," she said, and laughed a sound like breaking glass. "Good Christian people doing God's work." Silas knew that name. Every drifter, rustler, and wanted man between Colorado and California knew it. A town where Pastor Mordecai Thorne preached salvation with a rope in one hand and a branding iron in the other. What did you do to earn their Christian mercy? Loved the wrong man. Pastor's son married to someone else. They called it adultery, but it was the truest thing I ever felt. The girl couldn't be more than 21, but her eyes held decades of pain. Silas had seen those eyes before, in his own reflection, in the faces of men who'd done things they couldn't undo. But this girl's crime was love, not murder, not like his. "Can you stand? Can you run fast enough?" She was looking past him toward the horizon where dust devils danced like spirits of the damned. "They know you're here. Been watching since you crested that ridge." Silas followed her gaze and saw them 4 riders, maybe 5, still distant, but closing fast. Their horses kicked up plumes of dust that caught the dying light like smoke, like fire. He'd been running from fire for 8 years, ever since the night 47 souls burned in a church he was blamed for lighting, the night that turned him from a man trying to help into a monster's everyone hunted. "What's your name, girl?" "Clarabelle Morrison. Used to be the preacher's daughter before I became the town whore. Now I'm just the girl who wouldn't die quiet." Silas caught her as she stumbled, felt fever burning through her skin. The brand on her forehead was infected angry red spreading toward her hairline. She needed a doctor medicine time to heal. What she had was a wanted man and a stolen horse. "Silas Ward," he said, lifting her toward his saddle. "And I reckon we're both about to find out what comes after quiet." The riders were close enough now that he could see their faces, hard men with harder eyes, the kind who called brutality righteousness. One carried a shovel. Another had fresh rope coiled around his saddle horn. They weren't coming to rescue anybody. As Silas swung up behind Clarabelle, she settled against his chest, too light, too fragile like a bird with broken wings. But when she spoke, her voice carried steel. "They didn't bury me to punish me, Silas Ward. They buried me to silence what I remember." "What do you remember?" "The night your church burned. The night they made you into a killer when you were trying to be a savior." The words hit him like a physical blow. He'd never told anyone about Canyon Ridge, about the children he'd failed to save, about the 8 years he'd spent running from what he thought he'd done. "I was there," Clarabelle whispered. "I was 10 years old and I saw everything. I saw who really lit that fire." The riders were close enough now that Silas could hear their horses' labored breathing, could see the fire of righteous hatred in their eyes. Close enough that he could smell the smoke that seemed to follow him wherever he went. Then we better make sure you live long enough to tell it. He spurred his horse toward the setting sun, toward the Badlands, where shadows ran deep and secrets ran deeper. Behind them, the riders gave chase, their shouts echoing across the wasteland like the voices of the damned. But Silas wasn't running from the past anymore. For the first time in 8 years, he was running toward the truth. And the truth, as any man who'd ever faced a branding iron could tell you, was going to burn everything down. The cave sat like a wound in the canyon wall, hidden behind a curtain of sage and desert willow. Silas had found it 3 months back, when a Colorado posse had pushed him harder than usual. It wasn't much, just a hollow in the sandstone deep enough to hide a man and his horse. But it was the closest thing to sanctuary he'd known. Now he was sharing it with a girl who claimed to know the truth about the worst night of his life. "Tell me about the fire," he said, tending to the infection on her forehead. The whiskey made her wince, but she didn't pull away. Tough as rawhide, this one. "I was 10 living with my aunt in Canyon Ridge after my parents died of the fever. Pastor Coleman was a good man, gentle, godly in the way that actually meant something. But he had land that Pastor Thorne wanted." "What kind of land?" "Prime railroad land. Valley bottom, year-round water, perfect for a depot. Coleman wouldn't sell, wouldn't let the town council pressure him. So Thorne came to convince him, personal-like." Silas had heard this story before, but never from someone who'd been there. Never from someone who'd seen. Thorne came after Sunday service with 6 men, all wearing the cloth but carrying iron. I was up in the bell tower, hiding from my aunt. She'd been drinking again, taking her grief out on whoever was closest. And you saw everything. I saw Thorne corner Coleman in the sanctuary. Saw him demand the deed to the church land, claiming it was God's will that the railroad bring prosperity to the faithful. Coleman refused, said the church was meant to be a sanctuary, not a business. What happened then? Thorne showed him what defying God's will looked like. Her voice dropped to a whisper. He had his men bring in Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife. She'd been asking questions about some missing homesteaders. They'd done things to her. Cut her, burned her, left her barely alive. Silas felt his stomach clench. He'd seen Thorne's handiwork before, but hearing it described by someone who'd witnessed it made it real in a way that haunted his dreams. Coleman broke, signed the papers. But that wasn't enough for Thorne. He said there could be no witnesses to what had happened. Said the whole building needed to be purified. So he burned it with people inside. Not at first. First, he sent his men to round up the families who'd been asking questions about the missing homesteaders. Told them there was an emergency meeting at the church, a matter of life and death. The trap had been set long before the first match was struck. How many? 47 souls. All of them asking the wrong questions about the wrong disappearances. Thorne locked them in the basement, soaked the building with kerosene, then handed Coleman the torch. And Coleman lit it. Coleman lit it to save the children. Thorne promised to let them go if he destroyed the evidence. But the moment the flames took hold, Thorne shot Coleman in the back, left him to burn with the rest. The pieces fell into place, painting a picture that made Silas's blood run cold. Then how did I become the villain? Because you tried to save them. You saw the smoke, rode hard to help. You got to the basement before the fire spread, pulled 17 people out through the root cellar. But in the chaos, in the smoke and darkness, nobody saw your face clearly. Nobody except me. The memory came flooding back, the screaming, the heat, the impossible choice between saving some and losing all. He'd dragged people from that basement until his lungs burned and his hands blistered, thinking he'd failed them all. Thorne arrived with his men, just as you were leading the last group to safety. He shot Coleman's corpse, made it look like suicide. Then he spread word that a drifter matching your description had been seen fleeing the scene. called you a devil worshiper who'd burned God's house to strike at righteousness itself. And everyone believed him. Everyone except me. But I was just a child, terrified and traumatized. When I tried to tell my aunt what I'd seen, she said I was having nightmares, that grief could make children imagine terrible things. Silas was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of 8 years of lies. Why didn't you ever tell anyone else? Because they made me forget. The words came out broken small. They stole my memories. Who? Thorne's men. 3 days after the fire, they came to my aunt's house. Said I was having disturbing visions that needed treatment. They gave me laudanum, called it holy medicine. Made everything fuzzy, made the memories slip away like smoke. How long? 2 years. Every week, sometimes more. Just enough to keep me confused, keep the truth buried. My aunt thought they were helping me heal. She never knew they were stealing pieces of my mind. The rage that filled Silas was clean and cold like winter wind off the mountains. And now you remember everything. The desert woke me up. All those hours buried in the earth, certain I was going to die, something broke loose. The memories came flooding back like a dam bursting. Oh, why were you really buried, Clarabelle? She was quiet so long he thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. Because I found the list. What list? The real one. Not just the 47 who died in the fire. All of them. Every person who's disappeared in Redemption Creek over the past 8 years. Every family driven off their land, every voice silenced. The ground seemed to shift beneath him. How many? 153 souls. All buried in unmarked graves, all murdered for standing in Pastor Thorne's way. The scope of it was staggering. Not just a massacre, but years of systematic killing. A town built on a foundation of bones. Where is this list? Hidden where Thorne would never think to look. In the cemetery, in a grave marked Beloved Daughter. My own grave, the one they dug 8 years ago, when they first decided I was too dangerous to live. They've been planning to kill you for 8 years. They've been trying. The laudanum was supposed to stop my heart, eventually make it look like a weak constitution. When that didn't work, they tried accidents. Runaway horses, bad falls, tainted food. Finally, they decided to try something different. The pastor's son, Daniel Thorne, sweet boy caught between his father's ambition and his own conscience. He started courting me, bringing books, asking about my dreams. I thought he cared. I thought he loved me. He was gathering intelligence. He was falling in love. The problem was, so was I. When Pastor Thorne found out, he realized he had a better weapon than poison. He had scandal. A preacher's daughter and a married man. Daniel was engaged to marry the railroad baron's daughter. The marriage was supposed to seal the deal between Thorne and the Eastern investors. But when Daniel chose me over profit, it threatened everything. So they made you disappear. They made me into a cautionary tale. The fallen woman, the temptress who'd led righteousness astray. They branded me, buried me, and told the town that sin had gotten its due. And Daniel shot himself the night they took me. Left a note saying he couldn't live with the shame. Her voice hardened. But I know the truth. His father killed him to protect the family name. The cave was growing dark shadows creeping in from the canyon walls. Silas lit a small fire, keeping the smoke low. In the flickering light, Clarabelle's scarred face looked like something carved from stone. Why are you telling me this? Because you're the only one who can help me get that list. And because you've been carrying a lie for 8 years. Don't you want to know what the truth weighs? Silas stared into the flames, seeing ghosts in the dancing light. For 8 years, he'd believed he was a killer. He'd lived with the weight of 47 souls, had run from every badge and bounty hunter from here to Mexico. He'd become the monster they'd painted him as. What do you want to do with the list? I want to read every name. I want to dig up every grave. I want to make sure the world knows what Pastor Thorne really is. And then I want to watch him burn. The fire crackled between them, casting their shadows on the cave walls. Outside, the desert wind howled like the voices of the dead, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote called to the moon. "There's something else," Clarabelle said. "Something I haven't told you." "What?" "The railroad investor, Nathaniel Harrison. He's coming to Redemption Creek tomorrow. Pastor Thorne's going to show him the town, the progress, the order they've established. He's going to ask for more money, more backing, more power. And if he gets it, then there won't be anything left of this territory that isn't under Thorne's control. Every town, every family, every person who won't bow to his version of God's will." The weight of history pressed down on him, not just his own history, but the history of everyone who'd ever stood up to a tyrant with scripture in one hand and a gun in the other. "How do you know all this?" Daniel told me. In his letters before they killed him. He was terrified of what his father was becoming, what he was helping to build. He wanted to run away with me, start clean somewhere else. But you stayed. I stayed because someone had to remember the names. Someone had to speak for the dead. And now that someone is you. The fire was dying, the cave growing cold. In the distance, he could hear hoofbeats, faint, but getting closer. "They found us," he said. "Then we better get that list before they silence us both." Silas stood, checked his pistol, counted his bullets. 6 shots. Maybe enough, maybe not. Clarabelle. "Yeah. When this is over, when the truth comes out, what then?" She smiled, and for the first time since he'd found her, she looked like the young woman she was, instead of the scarred survivor she'd become. "I reckon I'll stick around. This territory's going to need honest folks to help it heal. And I've got a powerful need to see things grow instead of burn." The hoofbeats were closer now, maybe a quarter mile down the canyon. Silas could see torchlight flickering off the canyon walls, could hear voices calling out for blood. "You ready for this?" "I've been ready for 8 years, Clarabelle said. "Question is, are you ready to stop running?" Silas looked at her, this girl who'd been buried alive for loving the wrong man, who'd had her memory stolen and her face branded, who'd spent 8 years carrying the weight of truth that no one would believe. She was asking him to risk everything for a story that might not change anything. But she was also offering him something he'd never had a chance to be the man he'd always thought he was. "Yeah," he said, "I'm ready." The torchlight was growing brighter, voices closer. Soon they'd have to choose between fighting and running, between truth and safety. Silas Ward had been running for 8 years. Tonight he was going to stand still. The cemetery sat on a hill overlooking Redemption Creek, its weathered headstones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Most markers were simple wooden crosses, but here and there, elaborate monuments rose like accusations against the sky. Too many graves for a town that claimed barely 100 souls. "There," Clarabelle whispered, pointing to a marble headstone near the back. "Beloved daughter. That's where they put my name 8 years ago." The grave was well-tended flowers, still fresh, despite the desert heat. Someone had been caring for it, someone who believed the girl buried there had been worthy of love. "Who's been leaving flowers?" "Daniel's mother, I think. She never approved of what her husband was doing, but she was too afraid to speak up." Silas knelt beside the grave, feeling along the base of the headstone. The earth was soft, recently disturbed. "How deep? 3 feet. Metal box wrapped in oilcloth. I buried it the night before they came for me." The sound of pursuit was getting closer. Through the darkness, Silas could see torchlight moving through the town below, hear voices spreading out to search. "Keep watch," he said, starting to dig. The earth came away easily, still soft from recent rains. 3 feet down, his fingers touched metal. The box was smaller than expected, about the size of a prayer book. But when he lifted it out, the weight told him it contained something far more valuable than scripture. "Got it," he said, wiping dirt from the oilcloth. "Open it." Inside, sheets of paper covered in careful handwriting, names, dates, causes of death, all catalogued with the precision of a ledger. Sweet Jesus. Silas breathed, scanning the pages. Henderson, Crawford, Miller, all the families from the church fire. But there's more. So many more. 153 souls, Clarabelle said. All obstacles to Pastor Thorne's vision. Silas read on, his horror growing. Children who'd asked questions. Women who'd refused to surrender their land. Men who'd challenged Thorne's authority. All had met convenient accidents or simply vanished. This is more than murder. This is systematic extermination. It's what happens when a man decides he's God's right hand on earth. Torchlight was closer now, maybe half a mile away. Silas could make out individual riders, see weapons glinting in the firelight. We need to get this to someone who can do something about it. A federal marshal, a territorial judge, the railroad man. Clarabelle said suddenly. Harrison. He's coming tomorrow to meet with Thorne. If he saw this list, if he understood what kind of man he was dealing with, he'd walk away from profit. He'd have to. Look at the name Silas. Really look. Silas scanned the pages again, and this time he saw what she meant. Mixed in with local farmers and merchants were other names that carried weight back east. A territorial representative investigating land fraud. A federal surveyor asking questions about railway rights of way. A judge looking into missing persons reports. He's been killing federal officials. Anyone who might interfere with the railroad deal. Anyone who might ask inconvenient questions about how the land was acquired. The implications were staggering. This wasn't just local crime anymore. It was federal, the kind that could bring down corporations and destroy men like Harrison if they were found complicit. We need to get this to him before he signs anything. Now the whole town's hunting us. Because, Silas said, he's a businessman. And this list proves his investment is about to become a catastrophe. The riders were cresting the hill, now their torches turning the cemetery into a theater of dancing shadows. Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. This way. Clarabelle whispered, leading him toward a cluster of mausoleums built into the hillside. The Carver family tomb. Doors been broken for years. They slipped inside just as the searchers reached the cemetery. The mausoleum was dark and cold, smelling of dust and decay. But it was shelter, spread out. Thorne's voice echoed across the cemetery. Check every grave, every shadow. They're here. Through a crack in the stone door, Silas watched the searchers move systematically through the graveyard. It was only a matter of time before they reached the mausoleums. There's another way out. Clarabelle whispered. Through the back. Connects to the old mining tunnels. More tunnels. This whole area's honeycombed with them. Original settlers were miners before farmers. Half the town's built on old shafts. Footsteps were getting closer. Torchlight flickered through cracks in the stone. Go, Silas said. Find the way out. What about you? Someone needs to slow them down. Clarabelle grabbed his arm. No, you're not dying for me. Not after what I've told you. This isn't about dying. It's about making sure the truth survives. The truth needs both of us, she said firmly. You think I can face Harrison alone. You think a branded girl with a wild story will convince a railroad baron to walk away from millions. She was right. Together they might have a chance. Apart they were just two more victims. Then we go together, but we go now. The back of the mausoleum opened into a narrow passage carved from living rock. The air was stale, thick with the smell of earth and time. Clarabelle led the way, her hands feeling along stone walls in the darkness. The miners used these to move ore without going through town, she whispered. They connect to the old smelting works. Behind them, searchers were getting closer. Voices echoed through the cemetery, growing more frustrated. How do you know about these tunnels? Daniel showed me. Before his father killed him, he was planning our escape. The passage branched ahead, splitting 3 ways. Clarabelle hesitated, trying to remember which path led to safety. Left, she said finally. Left passage leads to the old mine office. They pressed forward, darkness closing around them. The passage was narrow, barely wide enough for a man to walk upright. There's something else about the list, Clarabelle said as they walked. Something I didn't tell you. What? The causes of death. They're not all accidents. Some are specific. Specific how? Hangings, burnings, brandings, all made to look like divine judgment, like God himself was striking down the wicked. Silas felt his blood run cold. He's been staging executions, public ones, making examples of anyone who challenges his authority. The whole town's been watching, thinking they were witnessing justice. The passage opened into a wider chamber. Stars were visible through a hole in the ceiling, fresh air flowing down from above. But as they moved toward the exit, voices drifted down from the cemetery. They're not in the graves. Must have gone underground. Check the mining tunnels, Thorne's voice replied. They can't have gone far. The sound of boots on stone echoed through the passages. The searchers had found the entrance. This way, Clarabelle said, leading toward another passage. The main shaft. They ran through darkness, footsteps echoing off stone walls. Behind them, pursuit was getting closer. Torchlight flickered in the passage, casting their shadows ahead like harbingers of doom. Wait, Clarabelle said, suddenly stopping at an intersection. Something's wrong. What? The air. It's not moving right. This passage should have airflow. Silas felt it too, the oppressive weight of stagnant air, the sense of walking into a trap. They've blocked the exit, he said, or they're waiting at the other end. Pursuit was very close now. Torchlight reflected off walls, voices of men who'd found their trail growing louder. There's another way, Clarabelle said. The old ventilation shaft. It's narrow, but it comes out near the church. The church, that's the last place we want to be. It's also the last place they'll expect. Sometimes the best hiding place was under your enemy's nose, but the ventilation shaft was barely wide enough for a child. I won't fit. You have to. It's our only chance. Torchlight was getting brighter, voices closer. They were out of time. Go, Silas said. I'll buy you time. No, we stay together. Clarabelle, I said no. Her voice echoed sharply through the tunnel. I've lost everyone I ever cared about to this madness. I won't lose you too. She was asking him to trust her, to follow her into a passage that might lead to freedom or death. But she was also asking him to have faith. Lead the way, he said. The ventilation shaft was a nightmare of rough stone and choking dust. Silas scraped his shoulders raw, felt his lungs burn with each breath. But ahead, Clarabelle kept moving, her determination carrying them both forward. The shaft opened into a small chamber beneath the church. Through a grating overhead, they could see the night sky and hear voices discussing plans. Tomorrow, Thorne was saying. When Harrison arrives, we'll have them by then, and their execution will be part of the demonstration. Show him what happens to those who spread lies. And if we don't find them, we will. And when we do, their deaths will remind everyone what happens to those who challenge God's will. Silas felt the weight of the list in his pocket, evidence of Thorne's crimes pressed against his chest. 153 souls, all crying out for justice. We need to get to Harrison before Thorne does, he whispered. How the whole town's looking for us. Then we wait. Let them think we've escaped. Let them spread the search wider. When their guard is down, we make our move. Above them, voices continued planning, scheming, preparing for the demonstration that would seal their power forever. But below in the darkness, 2 survivors held the truth. And the truth, as any man who'd ever faced down a firing squad could tell you, was the most dangerous weapon of all. Dawn crept across the desert like blood seeping through bandages, painting the sky in shades of rust and gold. Silas and Clarabelle had spent the night hidden beneath the church, listening to preparations for Harrison's arrival. Stage should be here by noon, someone was saying. Pastor wants everything ready. What about the fugitives? Still looking. But Pastor says it don't matter. Got plenty of other sinners to make examples of. Silas felt his stomach clench. Thorne was going to execute innocent people just to impress his investor. We need to move, he whispered. They climbed out through the loose grating emerging behind the church in a tangle of weeds and broken headstones. The main street was already bustling men, hanging bunting women, sweeping storefronts, children practicing hymns. The Hotel Clarabelle said, pointing to a 3-story building. That's where Harrison will stay. How do we get close? Half the town's hunting us. Same way we got out of those tunnels. We hide in plain sight. She led him to a clothesline behind the hotel where servants' uniforms hung drying. Within minutes, they were dressed as hotel staff. Silas in a black suit too small for him. Clarabelle in a maid's dress that hid her branded forehead beneath a white cap. Remember, she said, adjusting his collar, we're not trying to escape anymore. We're trying to save everyone else. The hotel lobby was chaos. Servants rushed about preparing for the most important guest Redemption Creek had ever received. Nobody paid attention to 2 more workers joining the fray. Room 12. Clarabelle whispered, checking the register. Harrison's booked the entire 2nd floor. They made their way upstairs, Silas carrying coffee, Clarabelle pushing a cart of linens. The hallway was quiet, most rooms still empty. But as they approached room 12, voices could be heard inside. Sequard, significant investment opportunity, someone was saying. Infrastructure's in place, workforce is disciplined, local population completely compliant. Compliant how? This voice was different, Eastern-educated, skeptical. Pastor Thorne has established governance that ensures order and productivity. Crime is non-existent, labor disputes unheard of, community unified in support of progress. Silas recognized the first voice. Deacon Matthews Thorne, second in command, already working on Harrison. What about reports of missing persons territorial authorities have received concerning correspondence? Malicious rumors spread by agitators. Pastor Thorne has dealt with these elements appropriately. Redemption Creek is a model community. I'll need to see evidence of this order myself. Of course. Pastor Thorne has arranged a demonstration for this afternoon. You'll see firsthand how Christian discipline maintains peace and prosperity. The demonstration, the executions Thorne was planning. They had to stop it. Knock, Clarabelle whispered. Silas rapped on the door. Coffee service. The door opened, revealing Deacon Matthews, thin, pale, with dirty water eyes. When he smiled, it looked like a wound. We didn't order coffee. Compliments of management, Silas replied, pushing past him. For your honored guest. The room was opulent by frontier standards, real carpets, glass windows, a bed with actual sheets. But it was the man at the writing desk who commanded attention. Nathaniel Harrison was younger than expected, maybe 50, with soft hands that had never held anything heavier than a pen. But his eyes were sharp, calculating the eyes of a man who'd built an empire by knowing when to invest and when to cut losses. Mr. Harrison, Silas said, setting down the tray. I trust your journey was comfortable. Adequate, Harrison replied, not looking up from his papers. Though this territory is more rustic than anticipated. The frontier has its challenges, Matthews said, but also opportunities. Raw land, untapped resources, population, eager for civilization's benefits. Indeed. Harrison finally looked up, and Silas saw something in his eyes, recognition perhaps, or suspicion. Tell me, young man, how long have you worked at this hotel? Just started, sir. Looking for honest work. Honest work. Commendable. Harrison's gaze shifted to Clarabelle. And you, miss? Yes, sir. Just trying to make an honest living. Honest living. Yes, I suppose that's what we're all after. Harrison walked to the window overlooking the main street. Tell me, what do you know about the missing persons reports filed with territorial authorities? Matthews stepped forward quickly. Mr. Harrison, I hardly think the staff... I'm asking them, Harrison said sharply. I like to hear from common people. They often have insights that escape those in authority. This was their chance. But if Matthews suspected anything, if word got back to Thorne... Well, Harrison prompted, people do go missing sometimes. Silas said carefully. Hard country. Accidents happen. What kind of accidents? Flash floods, snake bites, claim jumpers, the usual. I see. And these accidents, do they happen to anyone in particular? Silas glanced at Clarabelle, saw her almost imperceptible nod. Mostly to folks who ask too many questions, Silas said. The room went silent. Matthew's face had gone white, his hand moving toward his gun. But Harrison was watching Silas with renewed interest. Questions about what? About where land really comes from. About what happens to families who used to live on it. About why the cemeteries got more graves than the towns got people. That's enough, Matthews said, drawing his weapon. Mr. Harrison, these are the fugitives we've been hunting. The ones spreading lies. Wait, Harrison said, raising a hand. I want to hear what they have to say. Sir, I strongly advise. I said wait. Harrison's voice carried absolute authority. You mentioned graves. What did you mean? Silas pulled the tin box from his jacket, set it on the table. I meant this, sir. A list of every person who's died in Redemption Creek over the past 8 years. All 153 of them. Harrison opened the box, began reading. As his eyes moved down the pages, his face grew progressively paler. When he reached the second page, his hands started shaking. Oh, good God, he whispered. Judge Morrison. Representative Caldwell. Surveyor Franklin. These are federal officials. All asking questions about land acquisitions, Clarabelle said. All standing in the way of the railroad deal. This is impossible, Matthews said. These people died of natural causes, acts of God. Acts of Pastor Thorne. Silas corrected. Everyone murdered to clear the way for your investment. Harrison was still reading, his face growing more horrified. If this is true, if even half is true, do you understand what you're telling me? I'm telling you, you're about to sign a partnership with the most dangerous man in the territory, Silas said. A man who's built his empire on bones. You're telling me, Harrison said slowly, that my railroad is about to become complicit in mass murder. That's exactly what I'm telling you. Matthews was backing toward the door, gun still drawn. Mr. Harrison, you can't possibly believe these lies. These people are wanted criminals, desperate fugitives who'll say anything to... Shut up, Harrison said quietly. Just shut up. He was still reading the list, his face pale with shock and growing anger. My God. If this gets out, if authorities investigate, if my board discovers I've been negotiating with a mass murderer, your investment will be worthless, Clarabelle said. Worse than worthless. It'll be a liability that could destroy your entire company. Why are you telling me this? Harrison asked. What do you want? We want you to help us stop him, Silas said. Today, before he kills anyone else. The demonstration this afternoon, Clarabelle added. He's planning to execute more innocents. He wants to show you how he maintains order. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, staring at the list. When he finally spoke, his voice was hard as railroad steel. What do you need me to do? Matthews raised his gun finger, tightening on the trigger. I can't let you interfere with God's work. God's work. Harrison laughed bitterly. You call mass murder God's work. I call it necessary. The weak must be culled so the strong can flourish. Natural order. Under a natural order, Harrison repeated. You know what the natural order is in my world, Deacon. When an investment becomes a liability, you cut your losses. He turned to Silas and Clarabelle. What's your plan? We need to get this list to territorial authorities, Silas said. Real authorities, not local sheriff who's in Thorne's pocket. And we need to stop the demonstration, Clarabelle added. Save whoever we can. Done, Harrison said. My private car has a telegraph. I can have federal marshals here by tomorrow. As for the demonstration, he smiled grimly. I think Pastor Thorne is about to learn what happens when you try to swindle a railroad man. Matthews was still backing toward the door. You don't understand what you're interfering with. This isn't just about land or money. This is about building a perfect society, God's kingdom on earth. Built on mass graves, Silas said. Built on discipline, Matthews corrected. On understanding that some must die so others can live in peace. Whose peace? Clarabelle asked. The peace of the grave. The peace of order. The peace of knowing troublemakers will be dealt with swiftly. Harrison was studying Matthews with calculating eyes. You actually believe this, don't you? You actually think you're doing God's work. I know I am. Then you're either a fanatic or a fool. Either way, you're a liability I can't afford. Matthews's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, Clarabelle threw herself sideways, knocking over a table. The shot went wide, shattering the window. In the chaos, Silas grabbed the deacon's wrist, twisted until the gun clattered to the floor. That's for 8 years of lies, he said, then hit Matthews hard enough to drop him. Is he dead? Harrison asked. Just unconscious, but not for long. Then we need to move. How long until the demonstration? Maybe 4 hours, Clarabelle said. Thorne's gathering people in the town square. Anyone who's ever questioned his authority. How many? 12, maybe 15, including children. Harrison's face hardened. Children. Thorne doesn't believe in partial measures, Silas said. He's going to make this demonstration something you'll never forget. Oh, I'll never forget it, Harrison said, but not for the reasons he expects. He moved to his travel bag, pulled out a small but efficient-looking pistol. I haven't used one of these in years, but I remember how. You can't just walk into the town square and start shooting, Clarabelle said. Thorne's got too many men. Then what do you suggest? We divide his attention, Silas said. Make him choose between his demonstration and his survival. How? We give him what he wants most, Clarabelle said. Us, but on our terms. Harrison looked at them both, this scarred girl and haunted man who'd spent 8 years running from a lie. You're talking about walking into a trap. We're talking about springing one, Silas corrected. Question is, are you willing to risk everything to stop a monster? Harrison was quiet for a moment, weighing options. Outside, the sound of preparation, continued hammers on wood voices, calling orders, the steady rhythm of a town, preparing for what it thought would be a celebration. I've spent my entire life building my railroad, he said finally. I've stepped on competitors, bought politicians, destroyed anyone who stood in my way. I've told myself it was just business, just the cost of progress. He looked at the list again, at the names of people who died for asking questions. But I never killed children. I never murdered innocents. And I sure as hell never called it God's work. He holstered his pistol, straightened his jacket. What's the plan? The town square was packed tighter than a cattle car. Every soul in Redemption Creek gathered to witness what Pastor Thorne had promised would be a demonstration of divine justice. A wooden platform had been erected in front of the church, complete with a gallows that creaked ominously in the desert wind. 15 people stood on the platform, hands bound nooses around their necks, men, women, and 4 children, who couldn't have been older than 12. But there was something else, something that made Silas's blood run cold. A figure in the crowd, He recognized Deputy Tom Brennan, the young lawman who'd helped them in the hotel, who'd seemed sympathetic to their cause. He was standing near the platform, but his position was wrong. Too strategic, too ready. Something's not right. Silas whispered to Clarabelle as they watched from the shadows of the general store. What do you mean? Brennan, look at where he's standing. Clarabelle followed his gaze and saw it too. The deputy wasn't positioned to help the condemned. He was positioned to watch the crowd to spot any attempt at rescue. He's working for Thorne, she breathed. Has been all along. That's how they always stayed one step ahead of us. Pastor Thorne stood at the pulpit, resplendent in his black robes, his voice carrying across the square with the authority of a man who'd never been questioned. Behind him, Nathaniel Harrison sat in a place of honor, his face carefully neutral. To anyone watching, he looked like an impressed investor, dearly beloved. Thorne began. We gathered today to witness the wages of sin, to see what befalls those who would spread discord among the righteous. The crowd murmured approval, but Silas noticed something else: fear. These people weren't celebrating. They were terrified, witnessing their own potential fate. But these 15 souls, Thorne continued, gesturing to the condemned, have been found guilty of heinous crimes: adultery, theft, blasphemy, and worst of all, questioning the word of God. One of the children was crying, calling for his mother, but according to the list, his mother had been buried in an unmarked grave 3 months ago. But before we proceed, Thorne said, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner, we must deal with the serpents who have slithered into our garden. He raised his hand, and armed men emerged from the crowd, forming a circle around the platform. Brennan was among them, his badge glinting in the sunlight. Silas Ward. Thorne called out. Clarabelle Morrison, I know you're here. Come forward and face judgment. This was the trap not just for them, but for everyone who'd ever dared question Thorne's authority. The children, Clarabelle whispered. If we don't surrender, he'll kill the children. If we do surrender, he'll kill them anyway, Silas replied, along with everyone else. But then something unexpected happened. Deputy Brennan stepped forward, his hand on his gun. Pastor Thorne, he said, his voice carrying across the square. I can't be part of this anymore. The crowd stirred, confused. Thorne's face darkened. A deputy, you will maintain order, or... I've seen the list. Brennan interrupted. I've seen the names. I know what you've done. Silas felt a surge of hope. Maybe they'd been wrong about Brennan. Maybe. Which is why... Brennan continued, drawing his gun. I'm going to make sure there are no witnesses left to testify. He fired, but not at Thorne. He fired into the crowd, into the mass of terrified townspeople. Chaos erupted as people screamed, ran, pushed against each other in panic. Now, Silas shouted, and he and Clarabelle broke from cover, but as they ran toward the platform, Brennan turned his gun on them. I was wondering when you'd show yourselves. Why, Clarabelle demanded. Why help him? Because he pays better than the territory, Brennan said. Because he's going to win, and I'd rather be on the winning side. You're helping him murder children. I'm helping him maintain order. Sometimes that requires difficult choices. He raised his gun, but before he could fire one of the condemned prisoners, a woman Silas recognized as the town's schoolteacher threw herself off the platform. The rope caught her, but her momentum carried her into Brennan, knocking him off balance. The shot went wide, and in the chaos that followed, Silas reached the platform. He started cutting ropes, freeing the condemned prisoners, while Clarabelle helped them down. The children first, she said, lifting a terrified boy who couldn't have been more than 8. But Thorne wasn't finished. He pulled out a torch, held it high. If I cannot have order, he roared, then I will have purification. He threw the torch into a pile of hay bales that had been soaked with kerosene. The flames caught instantly, spreading to the wooden platform, the surrounding buildings. "He's going to burn the whole town," Harrison said, appearing at Silas's side. "Not if we stop him first." But Thorn was already moving, not toward them, but toward the church. And suddenly Silas understood. The church wasn't just a building. It was where Thorn kept his real records, his complete files on everyone he'd killed, everyone he'd controlled. "He's going to destroy the evidence," Clarabelle said. "All of it. Every name, every record, every proof of what he's done." They ran toward the church, but the fire was spreading faster than they could move. Buildings were catching, people were screaming, and in the chaos, it was hard to tell who was friend and who was foe. At the church steps, Thorn turned to face them. His face was no longer the mask of righteous authority. It was the face of a man who'd been exposed, who had nothing left to lose. "You think you've won?" he snarled. "You think exposing the truth changes anything?" "It changes everything," Clarabelle said. "It changes nothing." Thorn pulled out a gun, pointed it at her. "I built this town from nothing. I brought order to chaos, civilization to wilderness. And you want to destroy it all for what? For sentiment, for the weak and worthless." "For the truth," Silas said. "The truth." Thorn laughed bitterly. "The truth is that I am the only thing standing between this territory and anarchy. The truth is that without me, this place would be nothing but blood and dust." "Maybe," Silas said. "But that would be honest blood and dust, not the lies you've built everything on." Thorn's finger tightened on the trigger. "Then you can join your precious truth in hell." But before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind them. Thorn stumbled, looking down in surprise at the blood spreading across his chest. Harrison stood behind them, his small pistol smoking in his hand. "That cart," he said, "was for the 153 people you murdered, and for the investment you nearly destroyed." But their victory was short-lived. As Thorn collapsed, dying, but not dead, he managed to pull a cord that ran from the church steps to the bell tower. The church bell began to toll, not the regular call to worship, but a rapid, urgent clanging that could mean only one thing. "The signal," Clarabelle said. "He's calling them all." "Who?" "Everyone who's ever worked for him. Every man who's ever taken his money, every family who's ever benefited from his protection. They're all coming." And indeed, from every direction, armed men were converging on the church. Not just Thorn's inner circle, but shopkeepers, farmers, even some of the people they'd thought they'd saved. The corruption ran deeper than they'd imagined. "How many?" Harrison asked. "Maybe 30, Silas said. "Maybe more. We can't fight them all." "We don't have to fight them all," Clarabelle said. "We just have to survive long enough for the truth to get out." But as they took cover behind the church steps, as bullets began to fly, Silas realized they were facing something worse than a gunfight. They were facing a community that had been so thoroughly corrupted, so completely controlled, that it would fight to defend its own oppression. "There," Clarabelle pointed, "Mrs. Patterson, the doctor's wife, she's one of them." The woman they'd thought was a victim was actually raising a rifle, aiming it at the very people who'd tried to save her. And there, Jacob Miller. I thought his family was on the list. "Maybe they were," Silas said grimly. "Maybe that's why he's fighting so hard." It was a maze of loyalties and betrayals of people who'd been forced to choose between their conscience and their survival. And most of them had chosen survival. "We need to get out of here," Harrison said. "Regroup, find help." "There is no help," Clarabelle said. "Don't you see this is everyone? This is the whole town. They're all complicit." "Not all of them," Silas said. "Look." He pointed to a group of people, mostly women and children, who were running away from the fight, not toward it. They were the ones who'd been truly terrorized, the ones who'd never benefited from Thorn's system. "The real victims," Clarabelle said. "The ones who've been too afraid to speak up." "Then we fight for them," Silas said. "We make sure they have a chance to live free." But the odds were overwhelming. 30 armed men against 3 in a town where every building could hide a sniper, every shadow could conceal an enemy. The mine, Clarabelle said suddenly. The old silver mine up on the ridge. If we can get there. What's at the mine? Dynamite, enough to bring down half the mountainside. And bury the town, and bury the corruption. Sometimes you have to destroy something completely before you can build it back clean. It was a desperate plan, but it was the only one they had. Fighting their way through the chaos, using the smoke and confusion as cover, they began to make their way toward the ridge. Behind them, the church was burning. The fire had spread to the surrounding buildings, and soon half the town would be in flames. But this wasn't the cleansing fire of justice. This was the destructive fire of a tyrant who'd rather see everything burn than lose control. He's still alive, Harrison said, looking back at where Thorn had fallen. Still giving orders. And indeed, even wounded, even dying Thorn was still directing the fight. Still trying to maintain his grip on power, even as his kingdom crumbled around him. "And then we finish this," Silas said. "Once and for all." The old silver mine perched on the ridge like a wound in the mountainside, its entrance yawning black against the red rock. Silas, Clarabelle, and Harrison had fought their way up the treacherous path, pursued by 24 of Thorn's men, leaving a trail of blood and gun smoke behind them. "How much dynamite?" Silas asked, surveying the wooden crates stacked in the mine shaft. "Enough to level half the mountain," Clarabelle replied. "The miners abandoned it when the vein played out, but they left everything behind." Harrison was looking down at the town below, where fires still burned and tiny figures moved like ants. "If we do this, innocent people will die." "Innocent people are already dying," Silas said. "Question is, do we let Thorn's corruption spread, or do we stop it here?" "There's another way," Clarabelle said suddenly. "The mine shaft connects to the old tunnel system. If we set charges in the right places, we could collapse just the tunnels," Harrison finished. "Bring down the foundations under the church, the jail, the bank, all of Thorn's power centers. And leave the residential areas untouched," Silas added. "Give the real victims a chance to rebuild." It was a better plan, but it would require someone to stay behind to light the fuses at precisely the right moment. Someone who might not make it out. "I'll do it," Silas said. "No." Clarabelle grabbed his arm. "We've come this far together. We finish it together. And one of us needs to survive to tell the story. Then let it be you. You're the one who's been carrying the guilt all these years. You're the one who deserves to see vindication." Before Silas could argue, the sound of approaching horses echoed off the canyon walls. Thorn's men had found them. "No time to argue," Harrison said. "We do this now, or we don't do it at all." They worked quickly, setting charges in the tunnel entrances, running fuses back toward the mine shaft. Behind them, voices were getting closer, shots were being fired. "There," someone shouted. In the mine, the first riders appeared at the mouth of the canyon, their horses lathered with sweat, their faces twisted with rage and desperation. At their head rode Deputy Brennan, his badge still glinting on his chest. "You're trapped now," he called out. "Nowhere to run, nowhere to hide." "We're not running anymore," Silas called back. "We're making a stand." For what? For a few names on a list, for people who are already dead. For everyone who's going to live, Clarabelle said. For the children who won't have to grow up in fear. Children. Brennan laughed bitterly. "You're about to bring down a mountain on a town full of children. We're about to bring down a mountain on a corruption that's been poisoning this territory for 8 years. Harrison corrected. The riders were closer now, close enough that Silas could see their faces. Some he recognized men who'd seemed decent, who'd had families who'd been caught up in Thorn's web through fear or greed or simple bad luck. "Last chance," Brennan called out. "Surrender now and we'll make it quick." "Counteroffer," Silas said. "You lay down your weapons and we'll make sure you get fair trials." "Fair trials," Brennan spat. From who you've killed the only law in this territory. We've killed a tyrant, Clarabelle said. Now we're going to give Law a chance to grow back. That's when Silas saw him, a figure struggling up the path behind the riders, wounded but still moving. Pastor Thorne, blood soaking his shirt, his face pale, but his eyes still burning with fanatical determination. My children, Thorne called out in a voice like grinding stone. My faithful children, do not let these devils destroy what we have built. Pastor, Brennan called out. You should be resting. Your wound... Numb. My wound is nothing compared to the wound these heretics would inflict on our holy work, Thorne said. Kill them all, and let God sort out the righteous from the wicked. But as Thorne spoke, something unexpected happened. One of the riders, a young man Silas recognized as a local farmer, slowly lowered his rifle. Pastor, the young man said, if what they're saying is true, if you really killed all those people. It's not true, Thorne said, but his voice lacked its usual conviction. They're liars, devil worshippers sent to test our faith. Then show us, the farmer said. Show us the records. Show us proof that these people died natural deaths. I don't have to prove anything to you, Thorne snarled. I am God's chosen vessel. I am your shepherd. You will obey without question. No, another rider said, also lowering his weapon. We won't, not anymore. We've seen the list, a third man added. We know what you've done. Thorne's face went through a series of expressions: rage, fear, calculation, and finally, cold determination. Then you're all heretics, all of you. And heretics must burn. He pulled out a torch, one he'd somehow managed to keep lit during his climb up the mountain. If I cannot have your obedience, then I will have your deaths. He threw the torch toward the mine entrance where the dynamite was stacked. But he'd miscalculated. The torch fell short, landing in dry brush that immediately caught fire. The whole mountainside, Harrison said. The fire will spread to the trees, the grass, and eventually to the town. Clarabelle finished. He's going to burn everything rather than lose control. That's when Silas made his decision. He couldn't let Thorne destroy the town, couldn't let innocent people die for one man's madness. He ran toward the burning brush, toward the torch, toward the growing flames. Silas, no, Clarabelle screamed. But he was already there, stamping out the flames, grabbing the torch. Behind him, Thorne was raising a gun, pointing it at his back. You first, Thorne said. You die first, and then I'll kill your whore, and then I'll burn this mountain down around everyone who's ever defied me. The gun fired, but the shot went wide. Not because Thorne had missed, but because Clarabelle had thrown herself between them, taking the bullet meant for Silas. She felt blood spreading across her chest, but she was still moving, still breathing, still fighting. Now, she whispered. Light the fuses now. Silas looked at her, at this girl who'd been buried alive and refused to stay dead, who'd had her memories stolen and fought to get them back, who'd loved a man and watched him die for it. She was asking him to finish what they'd started, to bring down Thorne's kingdom, even if it meant leaving her behind. Together, he said. We finish this together. He helped her to her feet, and together they moved toward the fuses. Behind them, the riders were in chaos, some still loyal to Thorne, others finally seeing him for what he was. Gunfire erupted as the two factions turned on each other. The charges are set, Harrison said. But we need to get clear before... Before what? Thorne appeared at the mine entrance, his gun pointed at them. Before you destroy everything I've built, before you tear down the kingdom of God, before we set the people free, Clarabelle said. Free. Thorne laughed bitterly. You think they want to be free. You think they want the chaos that freedom brings. I gave them order. I gave them peace. I gave them purpose. You gave them fear, Silas said. You gave them death. I gave them what they needed, Thorn corrected. What they all need. A strong hand to guide them, a clear voice to tell them what's right and wrong. And you decided you were that voice. God decided. God chose me to be his instrument on earth. God chose you to be nothing, Clarabelle said. You chose yourself. You chose power over mercy control, over love, fear over faith. I chose survival, Thorn said. I chose to build something that would last. You built something that was already dead, Silas said. You built a kingdom of corpses. Thorn's finger tightened on the trigger. Then join them. But before he could fire, a shot rang out from behind him. Thorn stumbled, looking down in surprise at the blood spreading across his chest, a second wound, this one fatal. Deputy Brennan stood behind him, his gun still smoking. I'm sorry, Pastor, but I can't let you kill any more people. You shot me, Thorn said in disbelief. I shot a murderer, Brennan replied. I shot a man who was about to kill innocent people. I am God's chosen. You're a man who lost his way, Brennan said sadly. A man who forgot that God's work is about love, not fear. Thorn fell to his knees, his gun clattering to the ground. My kingdom, my beautiful kingdom, was built on bones, Clarabelle said. But something better can grow from the ashes. As Thorn died, as his breathing stopped and his eyes went dark, something seemed to lift from the mountain. The air felt cleaner, the sky brighter. The reign of terror was over. The charges, Harrison said. Should we still? No, Silas said. The tunnels can stay. The town can rebuild. But this time they'll build it on truth instead of lies. He lit the torch again, but this time he didn't throw it toward the dynamite. Instead, he held it high, a beacon that could be seen from the town below. A signal that the darkness was over, that the light had won. It's finished, Clarabelle said, leaning against him. It's finally finished. No, Silas said. It's just beginning. The trials took 3 months, but when they were over, justice had been served. Deputy Brennan received a commendation from the territorial governor for his role in bringing down Thorn's organization. The surviving members of the conspiracy were sentenced to long prison terms. The stolen land was returned to its rightful owners or their families. Most importantly, the town of Redemption Creek was rebuilt not as a monument to one man's twisted vision, but as a community where people could live free from fear. The new church was built on the site of the old one, but it was different, smaller, simpler, with doors that were never locked and windows that let in light. The cemetery was expanded to accommodate the properly marked graves of the victims, each headstone bearing not just a name and dates, but a brief story of the person who lay beneath. The memorial that Silas had proposed was built in the center of the town square, a simple stone monument with 153 names carved into its surface. Harrison kept his word, using railroad money to fund schools, hospitals, and libraries. The town prospered, but it was a different kind of prosperity, one based on honest work, fair dealing, and the rule of law. It's been a year, Clarabelle said, standing beside the memorial on the anniversary of Thorn's death. The bullet wound in her chest had healed, leaving only a small scar to match the brand on her forehead. A year since the truth came out. Feels like longer, Silas replied, and shorter at the same time. He was different now, but the haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by something that might have been peace. He'd found work as the town's sheriff, a position he'd accepted reluctantly, but performed with quiet efficiency. The irony wasn't lost on him, and the man who'd spent 8 years running from the law was now the law. Do you ever regret it? Clarabelle asked. Staying, I mean. You could have gone anywhere after your pardon. Where would I go? This is home now. These are my people. Even with all the memories, especially with all the memories, good and bad, they're all part of who I am. Clarabelle nodded, understanding. She'd made the same choice to stay to rebuild, to help heal the wounds that Thorn had inflicted. She'd been offered positions elsewhere, opportunities to start fresh in places where nobody knew her story. But she'd chosen to stay. "There's something I need to tell you," she said finally. "What?" "I've been offered a job. Federal position. They want me to work with other communities that have been through similar situations. Help them heal, help them rebuild." Silas felt his heart sink. "You're leaving?" "I'm thinking about it. It's good work, important work. And I think I could make a difference." "When would you go?" "Next month, if I decide to take it." "And have you decided, I mean?" Clarabelle was quiet for a long moment, her eyes fixed on the memorial. "I keep thinking about Daniel. About what he said to me the night before they killed him." "What did he say?" "He said that love wasn't about holding on to someone. It was about wanting what was best for them, even if that meant letting them go." "And you think leaving is what's best for you?" "I think I've spent the last year healing from what happened here. And I think I'm ready to help other people heal too." Silas understood. He'd made the opposite choice, to stay to face the past, to find peace in the place where he'd found pain. But that didn't make it the right choice for everyone. "What about us?" he asked. "What about us? Are we just going to pretend that nothing happened between us, that we don't love each other?" Clarabelle finished. "Yeah, that." She smiled, the first truly happy smile he'd seen from her. "Of course we love each other. We went through hell together. We saved each other's lives. We brought down a tyrant. How could we not love each other?" "Then why are you leaving?" "Because love isn't about possession. It's about freedom. It's about wanting the person you love to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include you. And you think you'll be happier somewhere else. I think I'll be useful somewhere else. I think I can make a difference. I think I can help build something good and true. You've already done that here. We've done that here, together. But now it's time to do it separately." 2 years later, Silas stood in the same spot beside the memorial, reading a letter from Clarabelle. She was in Arizona now, working with a community that had been terrorized by a corrupt mining company. The work was dangerous, but she was good at it. Her experience in Redemption Creek had taught her how to recognize the signs of institutional corruption, how to find truth hidden beneath layers of lies. "Sheriff Ward." Silas turned to find a young woman standing behind him, maybe 20, with dark hair and serious eyes. She looked familiar, but he couldn't place her. "Yes, my name is Sarah Brennan. I think you knew my father." Deputy Tom Brennan, the man who'd finally found the courage to stand up to Thorn, who'd paid for that courage with his life, when some of Thorn's remaining supporters had ambushed him 6 months after the trials. "I knew your father," Silas said carefully. "He was a good man who made some bad choices, but found his way back to the right path. He was a coward who spent years helping a monster," Sarah said bluntly. "But in the end, he did the right thing. And I want to thank you for giving him that chance." "I didn't give him anything. He chose his own path. He chose it because you and Miss Morrison showed him what courage looked like. You showed him that it was possible to stand up to evil, even when it seemed impossible." She reached into her bag, pulled out a small wrapped package. "I brought you something." Silas unwrapped it carefully, revealing a small silver badge, not the star of a sheriff, but something different. Instead of the usual eagle, it bore a simple inscription: "Truth, justice, courage." "Where did you get this?" "I made it. I'm studying metalwork at the new college. I wanted to give you something to remember what you accomplished here." "I can't accept this." "Yes, you can. Because you earned it. You stood up to a tyrant when everyone else was too afraid. You risked everything for the truth. You saved lives." "We all saved lives, your father included." "My father helped at the end. But you and Miss Morrison, you started it. You lit the fuse that brought down Thorne's kingdom. Silas looked at the badge at the young woman who'd given it to him at the town that had grown up around them. Redemption Creek was thriving now. Not the false prosperity of Thorne's reign, but genuine prosperity that came from honest work and fair dealing. "There's something else," Sarah said. "A message from Miss Morrison. You've been in contact with Clarabelle? She's been mentoring me, teaching me about investigation, about law enforcement. She wanted me to tell you that she's coming home." Silas felt his heart skip a beat. Home. She's been offered a position with the Territorial Attorney General's office, based here in Redemption Creek. She'd be investigating corruption cases throughout the territory. "When?" "Next month. She wanted to surprise you, but I thought you should know." Silas looked at the badge again, at the words engraved on its surface. Truth, justice, courage. 3 simple words that had changed everything, that had brought down a tyrant and saved a town. "Thank you," he said to Sarah. "For the badge, for the message, for choosing to be better than the circumstances that shaped you." "Thank you for showing me it was possible," she replied. "That people could change, that the truth could win, that courage could triumph over fear." She walked away, then leaving Silas alone with his thoughts and memories. The sun was setting again, painting the desert in shades of gold and crimson. In the distance, he could hear the evening train arriving, bringing travelers and mail and news from the outside world. But for the first time in years, Silas wasn't thinking about the past or the present. He was thinking about the future, about Clarabelle coming home, about the work they'd do together, about the life they might build. He pinned the badge to his vest, right over his heart. Truth, justice, courage. The 3 things that had saved him, that had saved the town, that had saved everyone, touched by Thorne's darkness. As he walked home through the lamplit streets of Redemption Creek, Silas Ward, former fugitive, former bearer of false guilt, former man without hope, smiled. He was no longer running from the past. He was walking toward the future. The next morning brought news that changed everything one final time. The train that pulled into Redemption Creek carried more than mail and passengers. It carried federal marshals, territorial judges, and newspaper reporters from as far away as San Francisco and Denver. But most importantly, it carried Clarabelle Morrison. She stepped off the train wearing a star on her chest. Deputy U.S. Marshal, the first woman to hold such a position in the territory. Her hair was longer now, her face had filled out, but the scar on her forehead remained a reminder of what she'd survived. "Sheriff Ward," she said formally as she approached him on the platform. "I'm here to investigate reports of corruption in this territory." "Marshal Morrison," he replied, playing along. "I'm at your service." "Good. Because I have it on good authority that this town was once controlled by a criminal organization that murdered over 150 people." "That's true. But the organization was destroyed, the criminals prosecuted, and the town rebuilt on honest foundations." "And how do I know you're telling the truth?" "Because," Silas said, pulling out the list that had started it all, "I have the evidence right here. Every name, every date, every detail. All of it documented by a brave woman who refused to let the truth die." Clarabelle smiled, then dropping the formal pretense. "Hello, Silas." "Hello, Clarabelle. Welcome home." "It's good to be back. Though I have to say the place looks different." "It is different. Clean, honest, free." "Free," she repeated. "I like the sound of that." They walked together through the town square, past the memorial with its 153 names, past the new church with its open doors and clear windows, past the school where children played without fear. "So," Silas said, "what happens now?" "Now we work together. You as sheriff, me as federal marshal. We make sure that what happened here never happens anywhere else. And when the work is done, Clarabelle said, taking his hand, We see what comes next. Together. Together, Silas agreed. They stopped at the memorial at the stone monument that bore the names of the dead. In the morning light, the carved letters seemed to glow with their own inner fire. They didn't die in vain, Clarabelle said. No, Silas agreed. They didn't. Their sacrifice exposed the lie. Their blood watered the seeds of truth. Their memory built the foundation for something better. And now we tend the garden they planted. We make sure it grows strong and true. As they stood there, surrounded by the ghosts of the past and the promise of the future, a child's laughter echoed across the square. Then another. Then more, until the air was filled with the sound of joy, of innocence, of hope. It was a sound that had been missing from Redemption Creek for 8 years, the sound of children playing without fear, of a community at peace with itself, of a future worth living for. Listen, Clarabelle said. I hear it. That's the sound of freedom. That's the sound of truth. That's the sound of people who are no longer afraid to be alive. Silas nodded, understanding. The work wasn't finished. It might never be finished. There would always be tyrants to face lies, to expose injustices, to correct. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't facing that work alone. One more thing, Clarabelle said, reaching into her bag. I brought you something. She pulled out a small leather journal, its pages filled with careful handwriting. What is it? The real story. Everything that happened here, everything we discovered, everything we learned. I wrote it all down so it wouldn't be forgotten. Why give it to me? Because you're the one who's staying. You're the one who'll be here to tell the story to the next generation, to make sure they understand what freedom costs. Silas took the journal, felt its weight in his hands. It wasn't just a book, it was a testament, a record of courage, in the face of evil, of truth, in the face of lies, of love, in the face of hatred. What do you want me to do with it? Whatever you think is right. Keep it, share it, use it to teach others. The story belongs to everyone now. Even the parts about us, especially the parts about us, because those parts show that love can survive anything, even being buried alive. They walked back toward the sheriff's office, past the hotel where Harrison had first learned the truth, past the cemetery, where the victims finally rested in peace, past the church, where evil had once masqueraded as righteousness. There's something I want to ask you, Silas said as they reached the office door. What? And when this is all over, when we've cleaned up the territory and made it safe for decent people, what then? Then we find out what comes after, and they lived happily ever after, Clarabelle said with a smile. And what do you think that is? I think it's whatever we make it, together. Silas opened the door and they stepped inside together. On the wall hung a map of the territory marked with red pins where corruption had been reported, where justice was needed, where truth had yet to triumph. Looks like we have our work cut out for us, Clarabelle said. Looks like it? Good. I was getting bored with easy jobs. As they began to plan their next move, as they prepared to take on the forces of corruption and oppression that still plagued the territory, Silas felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not just hope, but certainty. Certainty that they would win, that justice would prevail, that truth would set people free. Outside, the sun was climbing higher, the desert heat beginning to build. But inside the sheriff's office, two people who had faced the darkest evil and emerged victorious were planning for a future filled with light. The truth had set them free. And now together, they would use that freedom to set others free as well. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the desert, carrying the promise of new arrivals, new challenges, new opportunities for justice. The sound was sweet and clear and full of hope, the sound of a world where truth mattered, where courage was rewarded, where love could triumph over hate. The sound of freedom. And as Silas Ward and Clarabelle Morrison began their new life together, as they prepared to face whatever challenges lay ahead, they knew that they carried with them something more powerful than any weapon, more valuable than any treasure. They carried the truth. And the truth, as any person who had ever stood up to tyranny could tell you, was the most powerful force in the world. The story was over. The legend was just beginning.